You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Sons of the Shoe is back. It's Spencer German. No Nick Wilson this week, but happy to be here with you as we talk about all things Ohio State. Our last episode focused a lot on the NFL guys, the guys that got drafted in a couple weeks back. This episode, all back to the Ohio State program in its current iteration, its current state down in Columbus. And we got plenty of things to talk about with the transfer portal window officially closing for the spring. Guys that are out there. We know some names have obviously left Ohio State's program, not a ton. We haven't heard them linked to an offensive lineman. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What does it mean for the quarterback situation? What does it mean for that room in general? I have some thoughts on that. And I do want to talk about a little bit later in the show, Tim Walton, defensive backs coach, being on an absolute tear right now. And how excited I am about that. So we'll get into all those things coming up, guys, but I do want to remind you to like, subscribe, follow, whatever you want to call it, the podcast. We're still a relatively new podcast. I think we can say that until we've maybe been a podcast and been a thing for over a year. We're not quite there yet. We'll be there this fall. But find us, follow us, like us, subscribe to us, wherever you get your podcast, Odyssey app. Obviously, Apple Podcasts is the one we really want to push your way, so please find us there. You can also follow us at the 92 to the Fan YouTube channel and comment and jump on in and share your thoughts on things and some of the subject matter that we talk about on the show. And we do our best to try to respond to you guys and chime in with you there. Guys, it is May, and it feels like football is right around the corner. I don't know about you, but once the calendar turns to May, I start getting that itch. We haven't had football in a while. Yeah, the NFL draft tries to kind of hold us over for a little bit of time, but it's not actual tangible football games. But once you get to May, man, like you can see it on the horizon. June's coming, July's coming, camps start up, training camp starts in the NFL, and then August rolls around. You got training camps galore. You got college football right there in front of you, a couple weeks out. I can't wait. We're getting closer, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So excited about the time of year we're in, and there's plenty of buzz surrounding, of course, this Ohio State program as they continue progressing and working their way towards the 2024 season with championship aspirations. And with that in mind, I wanted to start with the fact that, as tends to happen this time of year in May, you get people putting out their college football rankings, their preseason or way too early, whatever they want to call them, preseason rankings. And Ohio State, on two notable ones, has come in as the number one ranked team. Ari Wasserman of The Athletic, formerly of Cleveland.com, which I'm very familiar with being a Cleveland, Ohio resident. But he had Ohio State as the number one team in the country. You also had Joel Klatt putting out his top 10 in terms of the programs in the country. And he had Ohio State number one, with Georgia coming in second behind them, which I think is probably the likely or the expectation in terms of what most of the rankings when we get to the preseason and the actual rankings come out are going to look like. And a lot of, Georgia's going to have a very talented roster. The recruiting classes these last couple of years have been top 5 every single year. So they have talent coming in, but they did lose a number of pieces. The one thing that I think works in their favor that maybe doesn't work in Ohio State's favor is the fact that they have the returning quarterback. Carson Beck will be back under center for them. And I think that is notable because when you have a incumbent quarterback with you on a team, and a veteran one at that, it usually bodes pretty well for your team having some success. Now, I think where Ohio State has is less worried about that problem is that you get Will Howard, who's a guy who's done it at the highest level, played at the highest level at Kansas State, and it's indoctrinating him into a new program, but not starting from scratch with like this fresh piece of clay that needs to be molded into some sort of great college quarterback. So you feel like you have a pretty good grasp of what he can do, what he will do in this offense, especially with Chip Kelly taking the reins on the with that offensive coordinator position. So yeah, like that's certainly a bonus for Georgia to have, and Beck returning. But I don't think it should begrudge us or make us feel any type of way about Ohio State not being number one in the country. And I don't think I'm assuming that most I'm assuming the preseason rankings will have Ohio State number 1, and now it's just going to kind of follow suit that way, that even other people who put out their college football rankings will have very similar assessments as Joel Klatt, as Ari Wasserman, as others, because of everything that this team did in the transfer portal, all the pieces that they added, the recruiting classes the last couple of years. It speaks to listen. It is going to be hard for anybody to challenge in terms of what Ohio State is built from an entire roster standpoint and say, yeah, they're not the number 1 team in the country. Now the question is, they have to go out and prove it. Being ranked preseason number 1 is one thing. Being ranked preseason in Joe Schmo's, a preseason ranking for Buckeyes.com. That's not fair because Buckeyes.com is the actual website, but you get what I'm saying. Some made up website from their mom's basement is one thing. Everybody consensusly is going to feel that way because Ohio State has done such a great job this offseason in constructing a championship caliber roster. But the question really becomes, do you want Ohio State to have a little bit of that added pressure on them of being the number 1 team in the country? And the reason I asked that question, I mentioned being a Cleveland native or a Cleveland resident, and being someone who talks about the Browns, covers the Browns, follows the Browns every single season. I have subscribed to this take with the Browns, and I'm telling you right now, like it's totally like a set myself up to be maybe excited rather than disappointed, if that makes sense. Like set myself up to be surprised. Maybe that's a better way to put it than disappointed type of mentality. And I embrace that and I accept that wholeheartedly. What I do is with the Browns, I sit there and I say, listen, I'm just going to give them like a modest 10-7 record and say, yeah, they might make the playoffs, but they could be in the wild card hunt and whatever, and we'll see. That way, if they do better than that, or I'll even say maybe they're going to be 9-8 and miss the playoffs, so that if they go out and they perform at a high level, and to be clear, I do this with all my teams. Throw one of my favorite teams in my face, I'll tell you I do this with all my teams. So it's not just a Browns thing. It's just my mentality on things when it comes to my teams generally. I don't want them in the spotlight. I don't want people talking about them as they're the next great thing. And I use the Browns as an example of that because it has felt like in the last 6 to 7 years with the Browns, after they drafted Baker Mayfield in 2018, it felt like there was all this momentum over the Browns. Everybody was picking the Browns, and they ended up falling on their face more often than not in those seasons. After making the playoffs in 1 year in 2020, they fell back a couple steps, took them till this past season to get back to the playoffs. So I temper my expectations all the time with my teams. It's a sad fan practice of mine. I admit that, but it's what I do. It's what I do. I set myself out to be surprised rather than disappointed. And I don't like my teams necessarily being talked about in the national media narratives and people just heaping praise on them and all these different things. Now, the reason I bring that up is because with Ohio State, it's different. With Ohio State, I expect every year for them to be in that conversation, so much so that if they're not in that conversation, then I'm disappointed. Then I'm like, what's happening that Ohio State isn't in the number 1 team in the country conversation, the national championship conversation? So I have a completely different mentality when it comes to the Buckeyes than I do with most of my other teams in my life, because I want Ohio State. In college football, if you're not in that elite conversation, you're already going into the season assuming that you have no shot. And that's not where any of us ever want to see Ohio State be. So I'm actually, and I understand, being number 1 in the country adds an extra level of pressure, right? Because you got the target on your back. There's nobody ahead of you that anyone's trying to chase or jump. You're going to get every team's best effort when you are dubbed number 1 team in the country. And right now, all these rankings, Joel Klatt, Ari Wasserman, Plumber Joe in his mom's basement, whatever, Buckeyes fan 69 in his mom's basement, their rankings aren't the official rankings. So I understand this is one thing, but that conversation is only going to continue once the official rankings come out. And I'm assuming Ohio State's going to be number 1. And so I'm expecting that. And so they're going to have that added pressure. And in a season where Ryan Day has a lot of pressure on him to finally deliver against Michigan, maybe even finally deliver on a championship that he was trying to kind of pick up where Urban Meyer left off and go be in that championship conversation every year and actually win some championships, he's got a lot to prove. So adding pressure into that pot doesn't necessarily sound all that appealing because you don't want to be this pressure cooker that then blows up in their face or, the moment's too big for somebody. But I with Ohio State, like, I expect it, I want it, and I embrace it because that's the state of this program. Like, that's where this program is supposed to be. This is the direction that they are supposed to be headed on every single year. And if they're not, then we all get a little bit worried about what it means for this team. So, yeah, I take a different approach with Ohio State than I do with my other teams in my life, like I said. And I'm embracing the fact that they're going to go into the season number one. And frankly, they should go into the season number one, given what they've built and the roster that they've assembled. I don't see how anybody other than Georgia even really comes close to that. I think maybe Florida State has a case, although they're going to have a different quarterback under center. There's certainly there are from top to bottom, like, there's not a roster in the country that is more put together and complete and deep, as not at every position, but as deep and talented as Ohio State's roster is. And so, yeah, number one is probably going to be a given. And I'm not so worried about that being the case and having that target on your back because, listen, when you're at Ohio State, you know what the expectations are. And that's the other thing too. Like, when you have you have a target on your back as the number one team in the country. I think Ohio State is a target on their back no matter what. Doesn't matter. They're Ohio State. They're one of the biggest brands in the country. Fans like you, me, Nick, others, let's face it, guys, we are very culty. College football fan bases in general are very culty. Now, there's levels to the cultianness of these fan bases. Like, we're not doing weird voodoo marching army parade type stuff like Texas A&M does at Ohio State, and that's nice to know because that seems a little over the top and kind of creepy every time I see those videos. But we are still very culty in the way that we support our team and, die on a hill for them at every waking moment and every turn. So, and listen, I embrace it. I don't care. I'm an Ohio State fan. You guys as Ohio State fans, we all embrace that idea that our team is the best and nobody comes close and the whole 9 yards. So fine. I can live with that. But we're obnoxious to a lot of the people outside of the Ohio State fan base, outside of the Ohio State zeitgeist, outside of Ohio in general. We're considered obnoxious. So I do think, like, no matter what, Ohio State is going into a season with that pressure anyway. And Ryan Day talks about that all the time, what it takes to win at Ohio State, what it means to be at Ohio State and win at Ohio State and perform at Ohio State, and that there's constant pressure on him, constant pressure on the program, constant pressure on the quarterback position. Like, they are held in a standard above everybody else. There's the haves and the have-nots in this sport, and then there's the programs that are like the elite level brand that everybody knows, and Ohio State is one of those teams. It's Ohio State, it's Bama, it's Clemson on some level because they're still living off the fumes of several years back when they were in the championship conversation year after year with Trevor Lawrence and that crew. There's Georgia. There is, and there's some other ones that live in that world where they know that they're always good. They're considered a step above everybody, and everybody else is always chasing them. And sometimes those teams slip up a little bit, and other teams creep in, like a Michigan this past year, to take the crown. So, listen, pressure is pressure. I'm not as worried about if everyone's going to dub Ohio State the number one team in the country, including the official rankings when those come out this summer. I can live with it in this instance, even though it maybe goes against what I do with some of my other teams, because that's the one team I've come to expect that from. Like Ohio State, every year I expect these types of expectations, this type of, I expect there to be this type of hype. I expect there to be this type of expectations on them. It comes with the territory of being the Ohio State Buckeyes. So I'm not getting scared away by people putting out there that the Ohio State's the number one team in the country. I think it's probably fair and reasonable, given everything that they've assembled this offseason through the transfer portal, through recruiting, and otherwise. I mean, this team is a juggernaut. We've talked about it on this podcast over and over and over again. We even threw out the question at one point, championship or bust. I don't know if I can say wholeheartedly like a season has to. I know we like to do that as Ohio State fans, like it should be championship or bust. But listen, if this team gets to the championship game but they lose, I'm not going to sit here and say fire everybody. Like that's a very good season, and it meets to me the Ohio State standard of being and competing for championships. But yeah, like when you're asking questions like that during a preseason, I expect nothing less than Ohio State to be number one, even if there's added pressure that maybe comes with that right to be the number one team in the country. How do you guys feel about it, though? Should Ohio State be number one in the country? Does it make you nervous at all to add a little extra pressure to the pot here, knowing that now if you go into the season as the number one team in the country, which I'm expecting, again, none of these rankings are official, but the official one comes out and Ohio State is number one. Do you feel are you good with adding a little extra pressure to the pot, knowing that Ohio State's going to get everybody's best shot? I think it just kind of comes with the territory anyway, and you just got to kind of expect that when you're Ohio State, you're going to get everybody's best shot regardless. But what do you think? Let us know via the YouTube comments of the 92 Through the Fan YouTube page. When we get back, guys, Tim Walton is on an absolute tear for Ohio State through the recruiting trail. We'll recap some of the big talents that he's recruiting and guys that are potentially coming to Ohio State. I say potentially because, commitments at this point can be very fluid things, and what it means for restoring to the program to a title that I feel like has escaped them in recent years. All that and more on Sons of the Shoe. But quick, here's a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to Sons of the Shoe. Spencer German riding solo with you this week as we talk Ohio State Buckeyes and everything going on with the program, leading into the summer months with spring practices and all that behind us. And guys, I have been banging the drum in recent years that the proud Ohio State program that used to be known as DBU, they have not earned that name in recent years. Let's be honest, guys. Like, gone are the days where they were putting out like year after year just top-notch cornerback and safety prospects and guys who were bona fide like NFL ready talents. And I have basically stripped them of that title for the last couple of years because we just hadn't seen the talent necessarily panning out and going to the next level from Ohio State in quite some time, from the days of like Denzel Ward and others who obviously came to Ohio State. And I am blown away by the fact that Jeff Okudah obviously coming out recently, Denzel Ward, as I mentioned, just the names of guys that have been considered some of the best in the sport. That hasn't been a common trend for the Buckeyes in quite some time. Like, I haven't felt like, Marshawn Lattimore, when he came out, was obviously a big deal. Jordan Hancock coming in was a huge deal. The list goes on and on just of guys who have come in through these walls that allowed Ohio State to be bestowed with the title of DBU. But like I said, recently, you feel like some of that stuff, Ted Ginn Jr. is another one that comes to mind. But regardless, guys, I recently, that it feels like the prowess of Ohio State as DBU hasn't been really there. And so when I see that defensive backs coach Tim Walton is out here going all in, trying to bring in some of these top recruits for future years, it gets me excited. Because so here's where we're at right now with the recruiting trail and what Ohio State's doing. Because I want to make sure we get to some of these, so like what is happening and who they're basically pursuing at this point, and names that they've been linked to as the recruiting obviously picks up this time of year, and they can kind of focus on that because there's no practices and things. So recently we already got commitments throughout this offseason from Devin Sanchez, Naeem offered from Alabama, Sanchez is from Texas, who are both 5-star cornerbacks in next year's class. And both of them, mind you, are also top 5. They're both top 5 in the nation prospects coming in next year. And that follows Blake Woodby, who is a Maryland guy, and he is top 100. He's a 4-star cornerback recruit, top 100 in the country. And this is all for the class of 2025. So corner has clearly become a point of emphasis for this team in trying to bring in some of these top end talents at that position specifically. And then there's been some buzz around Ohio State also adding in the 2025 class 5-star safeties Trey McNutt and Fehim Delane, who are also, as I mentioned, top-rated recruits in the country. Neither of those two have made commitments to this point in terms of where they are going to go. It's still up in the air, but Ohio State is on their radar, and some of the, again, talk and the murmurings, as I mentioned those two names and just the reporting around them, is that those two guys are also trending towards coming to Ohio State. This is what I've been waiting for. Tim Walton, thank God, he's out here restoring Ohio State to prominence as the official DBU. And this has been, I think, a problem for this team for a couple of different cycles now. I'm not saying they have been devoid of talent. I mean, Denzel Burke is really good. He's probably going to be a first-round pick in next year's draft. Nick and I talked about that in the last episode. And there's been other guys in the mid in here that have come through, gone to the NFL. I said, like, Jeff Okudah is another one, right? Like, he's one of the standout ones from college who's gone on to play in the NFL and is trying to have his own solid career there. And that's fine. But it used to be like every year you were talking about some Ohio State defensive back being like the next big thing. We've gone so far away from that, I feel, where it's like, okay, they got some guys coming out and coming through, but we're not really sure what they're going to be at the next level. You know, are they the best corner in football? I think a lot of that's come from the SEC teams. LSU is another. They like to call themselves DBU. And honestly, in recent years, maybe they could take that title when they have players coming out that are doing what they're doing as well. So I think Alabama's put out a lot of great defensive backs in recent years, a bunch of safeties that come to mind as well. So I think that Ohio State kind of got lost in the I don't know, because I don't even think it's like when Urban Meyer was still here, I think they were still recruiting defensive backs at a pretty high level. And then I feel like when he left, maybe that trailed off a little bit with Ryan Day. And that's maybe the timeline of how long I've been sort of noticing this trend of where are all the great defensive backs that we're all, praising and talking about playing on Sundays. We haven't seen that as much. And so I think that a lot of it maybe just has to do with, and we can call it a Ryan Day problem if we want, but I think a lot of this just has to do with since he's taken over the program, I do think that the emphasis has been clearly on the offensive side of the ball. And obviously some of that is just, that's Ryan Day's philosophy. That's Ryan Day's specialty and his strength. So of course he's going to target wide receivers and quarterbacks and building these great high octane offenses. We also know that's the reason why, he's lost to Michigan 3 straight years, is he's built these Ferrari type offenses rather than these offenses that are built for like a physical fight like they got against Michigan 3 straight years. So I think that there's just been some areas that have been maybe neglected by Ryan Day's staff or under Ryan Day in recent years. And I think defensive back has been one of them. I look at every year, I go look at these recruiting classes and I'm sitting there and I'm like, where are the great corners? Where are the great safeties? Like they're getting, some decent ones, 4-star guys, 3-star guys, but guys, Ohio State was bringing in 5-star guys regularly year after year after year at those positions specifically. And for them to not have that for a stretch here, I, again, sort of took the title of DBU away from them for a stretch. Now I think because of Tim Walton's efforts, they're trying to bring it back. And, it can also be said the fact that Walton, obviously, I'm assuming, played a big role in bringing in Caleb Downs, who, thank God, the spring portal window closed and he's still there, because I know people were kind of holding their breath on that one. But he probably had a hand in recruiting him when he was a big-time recruit coming out of high school, and now he comes to Ohio State, and he's going to be part of the program this year in a really big, important year, and he's one of the best players on this team. There's also reports that they're interested in maybe bringing in former Michigan State safety Jaden Mangum, who had 4 interceptions for the Spartans last year. He's in the transfer portal. Walton's efforts on the transfer part of this, the transfer portal side of things, is also a pretty notable one. When you're bringing in guys to help bolster that group and bolster the back end of the defense, that can't go unnoticed. And so the fact that you're seeing this, I think, is a good thing for Ohio State. I think it's been an area of concern for this team in recent years, because what do we say? The two things that I've noticed about recent years of Ohio State's defenses is that they're not getting pressure on the quarterbacks the way that they did under Urban Meyer, right? Where you had a Bosa brother, it felt like, for a long stretch of time there that you could always count on. You had Chase Young that you could always count on. They always had a great pass rusher, at least one, that was wreaking havoc. And then you had some great players in the secondary who were locking down guys and shutting down the back end of the defense. In recent years, I feel like teams have been able to move the ball up and down the field on this team because they couldn't generate any pressure, and you didn't have great cover guys on the back end. You had okay cover guys, and you had every so often you drop in a talent that was really good that was maybe taking away part of the field for you, but they haven't had a collection of an entire collection of talents that were just shut down the way that this year's group poses to be. And from the looks of it, what future groups look like they're going to be, because he has been Walton has been just a madman in trying to restore this defensive back unit and the Ohio State defensive back group to prominence again. And I can't be anything but encouraged by it, because it's what I've been waiting for. And it's again, Ohio State addressing the areas that maybe haven't been as strong for them in recent years on that side of the ball. That gives me, again, my expectations for this team are already sky high. And the fact that you're bringing back all these guys up front, Tyleik Williams, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, that group coming back gives me hope that this is going to be the year where that all comes together and they are generating pressure consistently, on top of the fact that their secondary is going to be lights out good. And we saw that in the spring game. I feel really good about it, and I like that they're now going back to their roots. They're going back to one of the things that has defined them over the years, which is, listen, we got our ass kicked by Michigan 3 straight years. We're going to start to be a tougher team. We're going to start to be a better team by addressing some of these areas. There's a lot of defenses about toughness. And to get guys in here who are talented, who are tough, who are going to just wreak havoc for opponents, that's what I want to see. I'm thrilled that they're doing this. And I look forward to seeing Walton continue to put his imprint on that, his position group, and on these recruiting classes coming up, because I am blown away by the effort so far. And it doesn't stop. Like I said, transfer portal, they're still looking. 2026 class, there's some names that have popped up already that they're looking at. So really encouraging stuff from that group. How do you feel? Is Ohio State starting to take back the name officially of DBU, in your opinion? Can they reclaim themselves as DBU with the recent happenings of the recent activity of bringing in Caleb Downs and rebuilding that back end of the defense through the transfer portal, and then also through the recruiting classes that are sort of playing out in front of us, the guys that are committed so far for 2025? What are your thoughts on it? Can we officially redub them as DBU here for the next for years to come? We'll take a break after a quick word from our sponsors. On the other side, I have a couple things to kind of wrap us up. Quinshon Judkins did something pretty cool. And also, that conversation, the one we've been having for the last several months about the biggest weakness on this team. What is the state of Ohio State's offensive line, and what does it mean for the quarterback competition? To the radio listening audience, I'm doing air quotes. We'll talk about it after a word from our sponsors. All right, guys, let's talk O-line. I apologize. Let's talk O-line as we wrap up the show here this week. And I know it's not the most glamorous position, but I maintain that it's probably the biggest weakness for this Buckeyes team going into next season. And there were some interesting things that came out of the spring game. What I'll say is the left side of the offensive line seems set in stone. I don't think anything's changing with Josh Simons and Donovan Jackson. I think those two guys are set. And that's actually the side of the offensive line I think is not a problem. Like, I'm not worried about that group whatsoever. From everything I've read, everything I've seen from camp, all these different things, Seth McLaughlin seems to be the front runner at center, and that makes a lot of sense. I'm assuming that stays true to form. And the only thing I worry about with Seth McLaughlin is the low snaps, because Nick and I have talked about this. Like, okay, yes, on one hand, maybe there was an issue with the communication between him and the quarterback that was referenced by Ryan Day at one point during the spring. But you would think by the end of the season they'd have that worked out. And it also seemed like those moments where he botched the snaps were coming in pivotal moments of games, and I don't want that. So I'm a little bit nervous about that. But I do think Seth McLaughlin is a fine center, and I'm perfectly fine with him being the starter there. Now, the right side is where things get a little bit interesting, because there's kind of a competition going on where they've moved Josh Fryer around from right tackle to right guard. Tegra Shabola has been playing guard and tackle, and Luke Montgomery's got some run there, and Carson Hinsman's got some play at guard as well. And I think based off of the spring game, I know there was several series where it looked like the Buckeyes were running Josh Fryer as the guard at the tackle spot, and then the competition feels like it's going to end up coming down to who's going to be that right guard between Hinsman, Tegra, and potentially Luke Montgomery. Montgomery was this highly touted prospect coming out of high school that everyone was excited about, sort of being the next great offensive lineman here at Ohio State. And as he kind of enters his redshirt sophomore season, I don't know that he's still necessarily ready. I think Tegra seems to be getting some run next to Fryer from what I've read and seen, where maybe he gets that job as a sophomore. And then Hinsman, because he's not going to be playing center because of the presence of Seth McLaughlin, maybe he's the guy that ends up winning it out. But it feels like it's coming down to the right guard spot being the one that still has to be truly settled, with Fryer maybe assuming the right tackle job. But guys, like, I don't know. From everything I understand about last year with this offensive line, and we saw it in games, we saw it play out in games. Like, it just seemed like they never got into sync the way you expect. Go back to the years with like Zeke Elliott running the football, and it's like those offensive line units were that they were a unit. Like, they were in sync. They knew what each guy was going to be doing, and they were just so productive and so physical that you never worried about that phase of the game for this team. And because of what's happened in recent years, you worry about that with this group. And I do think there still are some questions there about how this group kind of comes together. Now, you got Chip Kelly there, and I think that can't be understated. Like, you have this offense coordinator who's making it his sole purpose to focus on offense, to get this offense humming and use the talents that are on the team to put out this incredible high-flying offense. I think there's going to be a little bit more, because Ryan Day's talked about this, right? Like, just with the way college football is, and him stepping back and having to assume more of this CEO type role. I think that he wasn't able to necessarily sit down and really get to like the nitty gritty of what he wants guys to do, and he couldn't work with those guys as much. Now you have somebody who's strictly coming in to handle the offense, and I think that Chip Kelly getting his hands on these guys along with Justin Fry, who I've had questions about in terms of what he's building. But you had the one thing I'll give Justin Fry credit for, crying is what I've been doing about Justin Fry, is that it seems like the guys got better last year. Like there was improvements to their game up front. And I think that is an important note here. But we know in the sport, like a lot of it does come down to recruiting, but the coaching side of it matters. And so the fact that he's back, I think, speaks to his ability to coach these guys up and help them improve their games. And I think with a lot of these guys coming back from last year, you'll see them hopefully take that next step with Fry's guidance, and now with Chip Kelly integrated into it as well. But with a strictly offensive focused coordinator who isn't Ryan Day just calling the plays, I think they get a little bit more of a hands-on experience, and that I think matters. So that's some good news for this group moving forward. But I think there are still questions, and I think that they're lesser than what they were last year, but they still exist. And with this in mind, and the reason I want to kind of get to the quarterback situation in regards to the offensive line, as we all sort of have our theories on whether or not it's a true quarterback competition or not. And Devin Brown had an equally good spring game as Will Howard, and we feel pretty good about the idea that maybe I think Nick and I have kind of are more reserved to the idea that they've been trying to give Devin Brown reps in case he wanted to transfer, but he stuck it out. Which, by the way, I am as shocked as anybody that none of these quarterbacks transferred during the spring window. Like the fact that they kept this entire group, 5 quarterbacks, intact entirely is pretty damn remarkable, all things considered, because this is one of maybe the most talented quarterback room in the country. And they all know that they're all not going to be starters next year. Like somebody's going to miss it. And Will Howard kind of has the leg up in the clubhouse, I think, right now. But yeah, I do think that part of the reason why another reason I should say, why I lean Will Howard in this competition, again, doing air quotes, is because I think that because the offensive line is still leaving you with questions and some doubts, and there's still some spots to sort of nail down before they get into, summer camp and build up and get, start counting down to the season with what they want the depth chart to look like along in the trenches. I think that they know they can trust Will Howard to handle some of the nuances of what this group is going to bring to the table. And by nuances, really, I just mean if something breaks down, if there's pressure, he's going to know how to handle that and get out of it. And he's mobile to a level that he's done it at the college, in the college game throughout his career, where I think they probably trust him a little bit more than they trust any other freshman, maybe even than they trust Devin Brown and Keenholz to be able to handle it. So I think that is another sort of notch in Will Howard's resume that helps him in the cause of trying to win the starting job, if it's a true competition like they're saying to us, because I just think he is going to be able to handle some of the problems that could pop up with this group. Like, no, you're not going to turn the offensive line around overnight. I was kind of surprised they weren't more involved. I haven't seen, and maybe I just missed it, but I haven't seen them linked to anybody in the transfer portal at this point along the offensive line. And that's okay. It's not the end of the world. And I understand like the big names, your Caden Proctors of the world, those guys obviously weren't coming to Ohio State. They already had some things kind of nailed down. And so the top names, your 5-star recruit type talents, they have their own, they made their own decisions, and they're back wherever they are. They transfer where they are, and they're not necessarily coming. They're not coming to Ohio State at this point. There are still some names out there that I guess intrigue me to an extent. that I could see Ohio State potentially still pursuing, but I think given how spring went and given the fact that you haven't heard them linked to anything notable at that along the offensive line specifically, I think they seem pretty complacent or pretty content with just running it out with the group that they have currently on the roster, and they'll sort this thing out in camp, get an offensive line. They keep talking about playing the best 5. I think they're still trying to figure out who those best 5 are, and we'll probably know more of that once camp, starts and breaks and the season's here. So I don't even think they have an answer to that yet, but it seems like they're pretty content with that. And because they're content with that, I think I have to be content. And that content's not the right word. I want to be fair to Will Howard here because I did think that was a solid addition through the portal to get not the necessarily the top quarterback I wanted in the portal, but I think it's a veteran guy who has a certain demeanor to him and is going to be able to navigate the pocket and some of the things that could break down up front as you maybe test out different guys throughout the season or just, have a weak link there. He seems more equipped to handle that than some of the other guys. Devin Brown doesn't have the experience yet, and I understand people really like him, and there's some poise about him, and there's been a lot of talking him up this spring, but I just don't know if he's ready for that, and I certainly don't think any of the freshman guys, not Keen Holtz, and Aaron Noland and Julian Sayin are ready for that as well. So it's again, as I assess the situation, I think it's better than last year, and that should mean something for Buckeyes fans, and it should mean that they're better from last year and that Justin Fry's coaching is getting through to them. I'm still a little bit worried about it, but I do think it adds to just the if you're looking for like a pros and cons of who's going to win the starting quarterback job, or you're looking for like the reasons, the answers to that question specifically, and who really is the front runner, I think it's another reason why Will Howard ends up making the most sense when push comes to shove, and this entire ordeal is being wrapped up before the season starts and they actually name a starter. I think they're just going to ultimately have more faith that Will Howard's going to be able to handle those things better because he's a veteran presence in this group. What do you think about the offensive line and the state of it? Were you surprised that Ohio State wasn't linked to more offensive line transfers during the spring window? And what does it mean, you think, for the quarterback competition? I keep using air quotes that Ohio State kind of has brewing. Is it another reason why Will Howard should be the guy leading this group next season? Guys, before we get out of here, I want to shout out some praise to Quinshawn Judkins. This was interesting because Quinshawn Judkins, and I first of all, I want to give him his props because he donated $10,000 to his high school, Pike Road High School, which is based out of Alabama, to help their football program. And he said that for every touchdown he scores, he will also donate another $1,000. Actually, I take that back. He's not donating it to his high school program. The $1,000 he'll donate for every touchdown he scores is going to go to the Alabama Kidney Foundation. So this is an interesting thing because, and this is a byproduct of the NIL era, mind you. Now that guys are making money, now that guys are getting paid for their likeness and for their ability to go out and sign autographs and to come to schools and sponsorship deals and all these different things, this is a very we talk so much about how it's ruining college football, and I can't believe, like, this isn't the college football I grew up in. This isn't my dad's college football. This is my grandfather's college football. Oh, what are we doing to these kids? All this different stuff. I don't say that. Nick doesn't say that, but those who do say that, that's one of the big negatives about it. This is, I think, a positive byproduct of that. Players at this age, at this point in their careers, as just ripe young college students, are donating money, giving to good causes, giving to charity. I think that's a cool thing to see. So shout out to Quinshawn Judkins. Props to him. And let's hope he scores a lot of touchdowns so he's donating a lot of money to the Alabama Kidney Foundation. Although, I don't know we don't know the specifics of what all these players are making. You hear some of the rumors about Ohio State's salary cap going up and all the money that's been thrown around and all the money that total they've spent on bringing kids in through the NIL stuff. But I don't know how much specifically Quinshon Judkins is making, but I wonder if he's going to maybe contemplate if he gets too high of a touchdown total, sliding down the 1 yard line a little bit more and letting Trayvon Henderson finish the job so that he doesn't have to give all his money away. But if the money's good, maybe he doesn't care. If the money's good, the money's good. Good props to him for that. So I thought that was cool, though, and I want to give him a shout out. But guys, as always, we appreciate you listening. Nick should be back next week. I actually have a fun topic for next week. This new look Big Ten, right? We know Michigan will always be rival number one. That ain't changing anytime soon. Probably never. Who is the Buckeyes' biggest rival in the Big Ten outside of Michigan? With the way it's kind of been restructured and redone in recent years. We'll talk about that next week with when Nick returns. Very much looking forward to it. So in the meantime, I implore you to follow, subscribe, Sons of the Shoe in Apple Podcasts, the Odyssey app. Did I mention Apple Podcasts? And of course, over the 92 to the Fan YouTube channel where you can watch this podcast if you so wish, and you can comment and leave your thoughts and hopefully praises, but also just your general opinions on different topics that we talked about throughout the show. You can also hit me up on X at Spencito_. Until next time, guys, take it easy. Have a great weekend and go Bucks.